Hey ocean travelers around the world, this is Davy Jones' Locker, from sailor's curse to real deep-sea tombs. A curse, sailors whispered, became the deepest cemetery humans ever made. They speak of a battleship that disappeared in seconds. No storm in sight, no warning flare, just the quiet roll of the horizon. And then nothing. Metal that weighed more than a city block folded like paper. And the sea closed its surface as calmly as if it had only breathed in. They also speak of a submarine that sent a routine message, promised a routine return, and then never called again. In the dark miles below, it met the kind of pressure that turns air into a hammer. Far away in a different ocean, a camera the size of a backpack dropped through black water until its lights found a ship's nameplate at 4,000 meters. The letters wore a coat of fine silt, soft as dust. Fish glided like slow sparks. The ship rested there the way a person rests when sleep is final. These three doors open the same room, the place sailors call Davy Jones' Locker. Tonight, it will not be a ghost story. It will be a calm walk through a real landscape most people will never see with their own eyes, and yet everyone already knows in the bones. At sea, the phrase Davy Jones' Locker lived on tongues before it lived in books. It showed up in log entries where officers wrote, "He went to Davy Jones" because a paper line felt kinder than writing. He drowned. It surfaced in shanties sung to keep time at the capstan when a ship needed every back and shoulder to move an anchor and every voice to push away heavy thoughts. It slipped through jokes on deck when waves got tall, and it returned in a whisper when a storm passed and a friend did not. The origin stories are many and none are certain. Some old tellings tie it to Saint David of Wales, others to Jonah of the Bible, thrown to the deep and delivered back. Some say it grew from a mash of slang, Jones as a common man's name, and a devil who lived under the keel. The duppy or devil sailors half believed in long nights. The truth is simpler. Crews needed a name that could hold fear without breaking. The locker was the ocean's basement, where lost things stay put. A locker keeps what goes inside. The sea, as they say, keeps what it takes. Why did the deep feel like a curse when it was only nature doing what it always does? Begin with pressure. Every 10 meters down, the weight of water adds another atmosphere. At 1,000 meters, the squeeze is like stacking a school bus onto every square foot. At 4,000, even sound feels different. Darkness arrives quickly too. The blue falls away, and then the black is complete. It is a calm black, not a haunted one, but it is total. The water is cold and steady, near freezing in many places, and the currents move like rivers that forgot to hurry. In this environment, the ocean is not angry. It is efficient. A ship that loses strength at the wrong moment fails in a chain, not a single break. A plank gives, a beam shifts, water rushes in and weight does the rest. The same is true for people. It is not the ocean that is cruel. It is the mix of cold, fatigue, and time. A person at the surface has minutes to make choices and to be seen. At depth, choices run out faster than minutes. Quick fact: survival rules at sea look superstitious when written on land, but they came from math. A life jacket kept a face above a wave. A tether kept a person connected to the ship. A habit kept a deck clear so nothing tripped a running crew. Superstition and protocol looked similar from far away. Up close, one saved lives and the other soothed voices. While the saving happened, waves take. But the sea has also given the oldest form of farewell, burial at sea. It has been practiced not for romance, but for need. Sailors followed a simple shape of ritual, because time and space were not kind. A body was washed, wrapped, and weighted. Flags dropped. A prayer followed, sometimes as small as safe home, sometimes as formal as a full liturgy. On merchant ships, the captain spoke quietly. On naval ships, the chaplain did, if there was one aboard. In wars there was no time to wait. Many were buried together when battle did not leave hours for individual grief. Sometimes burial at sea becomes something else, entombment in the hull. Ships that break slowly leave time to lower lifeboats, tie ropes and carry the injured. Ships that break fast close up with crew still inside, and the steel becomes a sealed room where air, silence and darkness settle and remain. Families on shore receive telegrams and calls that carry as much certainty as a message can carry without a grave they can touch. Notices in peacetime bring a search, more notices and eventually a statement. The law calls closure. Closure does not close everything. The ocean is a grave that cannot be visited in the usual way. That is why sailors built a phrase like a handhold. Davy Jones' locker gave a shape to what could not be seen. Other cultures wrote their own maps to the same room. In the north, storytellers spoke of Ran, a sea figure who pulled the drowned into her hall with a net, not as punishment, but as a law of her world. In old Mediterranean tales, the sea answered to gods of storms and earthquakes, who were not cruel so much as they were large. In island chains across the Pacific, the ocean was a place of ancestors and pathways, not only of loss. The common thread is simple: the sea keeps what it takes. It is not malicious. It is permanent. Step by step, this idea has guided behavior for thousands of years, long before a camera ever saw a rivet on the seafloor. Now, for the first time in history, people can look directly into this locker. The tools are quiet, but powerful. Sonar sends sound that touches shapes and returns with a sketch. It draws outlines with echoes. Autonomous underwater vehicles, which do not need a pilot's constant hand, fly slow and straight like gliders, mapping with patient eyes. Remotely operated vehicles, driven by joysticks from ships far above, carry lights and cameras, arms and sensors. Photogrammetry takes hundreds of overlapping photographs and turns them into a three-dimensional model, so precise that a viewer can trace a crack in a plate or a thread of rope on the deck. When these tools showed their first close-ups of deep wrecks, science gained information and families gained something else. A place to look at and a way to say, there, watch out for this. Exact images do not always bring comfort. The same camera that proves a ship's resting place also proves that it is a grave. The tone must stay gentle. The sea is not a museum aisle. It is a resting ground. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really enjoy and want to fall asleep with ocean stories whenever you want. The stories now turn to ships and crews, whose names live on, because the ocean did not give them back. A war grave at sea is not marked by marble. It is marked by law and custom. When a nation declares a lost vessel a war grave, it is saying that those who died there are still there, that the ship is a tomb, and that it should be protected from disturbance. Some graves are shallow and known to many. A harbor in the Pacific holds a battleship that broke in a morning attack. It rests in water so clear that sunlight paints the hull. Oil beads still rise slowly, a few each day, tiny and stubborn, like notes on a calendar nobody asked to keep. Families come to the surface above and leave flowers. The ship is not a tourist site. It is a memorial that asks visitors to speak quietly. Far north in a cold bay known for storms and tides, a battleship that sank early in a war lies over a bed of sand. Divers rarely visit. Survivors and their families asked authorities to guard it with rules, and the rules stood. In the warm Atlantic, the seafloor holds an army of smaller wrecks, corvettes, frigates, transports, each with its own story, each with names that may be known in one town and unknown to the rest of the world. Each one is a place where lives ended suddenly, or slowly, where goodbyes sometimes happened, and sometimes did not. Submarines are a special chapter, because they are by design, sealed worlds. When a submarine fails at depth, the pressure crushes the hull faster than a person can take a breath. That is not written to shock. It is written to calm the imagination. There is little suffering to picture in that moment. The sea allows no long fear. In the early years of the nuclear age, a submarine in the Atlantic went out on trials and never returned. The investigation that followed led to fleets worldwide changing rules, retraining crews, and redesigning parts in ways that still protect sailors today. Later, another submarine disappeared in the same ocean, and its loss, still discussed in careful language, reminds planners that even advanced ships can meet basic physics. On a different coastline, a diesel-electric boat, with a proud history, answered one last call and then grew silent. The search that followed drew a whole nation to maps. The final discovery, far offshore and deep beyond diving, confirmed what families had already felt in their core. Quick fact: many submarine graves are never opened again. Not because technology cannot reach them, but because families and navies choose to leave them sealed. It is not secrecy. It is respect. Peacetime does not protect. It only changes the reasons. Civilian liners and cargo ships have become sea cemeteries too. A fog-choked river delta sent one ship under so quickly that those on deck did not have time to run. The list of names includes families traveling together, workers heading home, and children whose stories must be told by relatives who never forget birthdays. A winter cursing found ice and a hole, and a ship that most believed unsinkable met the same law of weight and water that governs every boat, from a skiff to a cruise ship. The sea does not care about reputation. Divers who have visited wrecks in accessible depths often speak softly about what they saw. A cup half buried in silt, a pair of shoes side by side, a bell recovered in a legal memorial expedition and rung once in the air as a salute. An ROV operator once said, "The stillness is what stays with a person." The phrase rust flowers appears in science papers to describe the way bacteria eat iron and build structures that look like coral. They are called rusticles. They are not pretty in the way a flower is pretty, but they are alive and they tell time better than many clocks, because their growth rates say how quickly a ship is turning back into dust. Watch out for this. People sometimes ask why governments do not raise every lost liner. The answer is short. It is not simple. Depths, cost, risk, law, and above all, the wishes of families in grief combine into a decision. The modern consensus is calm, document, memorialize, and do no harm. To make sense of the ocean's vastness, it helps to draw a mental map. Some wrecks lie on continental shelves, where the seafloor is wide and relatively shallow compared to the abyss. These areas hold most trade routes because ships prefer a path that stays within rescue helicopter range and away from tall storms when possible. Shelves are where fishing boats work, where pipelines run, and where storms can suddenly turn a normal trip into a hard fight. Other wrecks rest on the abyssal plain, thousands of meters down, where the bottom is flat, the currents are slow, and silt settles like snow in a room with no wind. The deepest lie in trenches, hadil zones, where the seafloor folds into long valleys. Few ships sink there because ships do not sail there as often, but when one does, it is likely gone past anything but an ROV's clear eye. War theaters write their own clusters. The North Atlantic holds a belt of wrecks born from convoy battles. The Mediterranean holds layered centuries-ancient cargoes of amphoroi, wooden frames long devoured by organisms that love wood, and modern steel plates covered in marine growth. The Pacific, the largest ocean, holds everything from tiny gunboats to giants. Step by step, the map fills and reveals a pattern. Where people go, stories gather. Where stories gather, the ocean has a way of keeping them. Nature is the builder of this map. Rogue waves sound like myth until they meet a ship. They form when waves traveling at different speeds add their crests together for a short time in a limited space. That makes one wave far taller than its neighbors. A ship that meets such a wall of water from the side can roll beyond the safe angle. If water fills decks or breaks windows at that angle, recovery becomes very hard. Cyclones and hurricanes do their work with wind and long fetch, piling seas across open distance, while the pressure drop at the storm's center lifts the ocean itself. Ice works by simple contact. A berg that looks small reaches deep below the surface, and a scrape that seems minor can open a fatal wound below the waterline. Currents and tide pull in directions no chart fully captures, especially in river mouths where fresh water and salt water meet in a moving line. Quick fact: a calm-looking sea can be dangerous because danger is not always loud. Weight, timing, and small mistakes, stacked together, have the power to end a voyage. Sailors gave these forces names that sound like monsters because simple words help in hard moments. The ocean was never a villain. It was a teacher that never negotiated deadlines. The question of who decides what happens to a wreck is both legal and ethical. Many warships belong to the flags they flew forever, regardless of where they rest. That idea is called sovereign immunity. It means nobody may salvage or cut without permission from the nation that owns the ship. Some states have passed laws to protect war graves specifically, blocking diving or anchoring nearby. Agreements exist to guide behavior around historic wrecks and cargoes, and a major international convention sets a respectful tone for underwater cultural heritage. Salvage law, which grew from the old idea of rewarding those who save property at sea, is carefully limited when human remains are present. Courts look not only at value but at harm. It is not a market, it is a memorial. Families often speak up in these debates, and their voices have weight. The modern consensus sounds like this: film and map, don't disturb. Share images for education. Build memorials on land that people can visit. Leave the site itself in peace, unless there is a pressing safety reason to act, such as pollution risk from old fuel tanks that threaten the environment. Even then, work crews move as if they are in a cemetery, because they are. The phrase Davy Jones wandered from logs into literature with ease. Writers loved the way it carried mood in 2 words. It appeared in sea songs that made hard work feel lighter, and in tales where sailors traded stories on quiet watches. It later stepped onto movie screens and into theme songs, sometimes as a trickster figure, sometimes as a person drawn larger than life. Pop culture, to its credit, rarely claimed to be accurate. It took the feeling and built set pieces from it. That is fine as long as anyone listening knows the difference between a myth with a name and a fact with coordinates. What did pop culture get right? The sense that the sea is bigger than people, and that the deep is a final place. Where does it blur? It suggests that the ocean chooses when in fact the ocean simply is. Why did the myth survive microscopes and sonar screens? Because even when tools can show rivets, people still need a word for a place that is part fear, part respect, part memory. There are living memorials as well. Artificial reef programs, carefully licensed, place structures on the seafloor to create habitat for fish and coral. Some allow families to mix a loved one's ashes into reef blocks. These are not shipwreck graves, but they are ocean graves in a new sense, chosen and designed. In other cases, ashes are scattered at sea according to simple guidelines that protect wildlife and respect boaters and swimmers. Wrecks themselves act as reefs in many regions. Fish gather around the shelter a hull provides. Sponges and corals anchor to metal and grow into forests. Crabs and octopuses find homes in pipes and plates. The paradox is gentle. Places where life ended become places that host new life. A diver once said after hovering by a wreck for an hour, "It felt like visiting a quiet neighborhood in a city I didn't know." That is the right image to hold. This is not horror. It is ecology with a story. Human voices belong here too. Letters sent from ships before radios were common, read like postcards from another world. All is well. Sea like glass, one might say. Another might joke about the cook's soup or the way a storm tipped the dinner plates. In later decades, radio telegraphy and then radio allowed captains to report position and weather. Final messages, when they exist, are often ordinary because no one knows a message is final when it is sent. A lighthouse keeper once wrote in a log during a gale, "Signals exchanged, visibility poor," and only learned 2 days later that the ship he had signaled was gone. Families live with gaps in the story. The missing person's timeline starts with hope, moves to search, then to investigation, and ends in an official declaration many months later. Rituals fill what paper cannot. Families gather on piers to cast flowers on water. Names are carved in stones near harbors. Anniversaries are kept in kitchens and in quiet. A parent may say, "He loved the smell of salt on his jacket," and that becomes the memorial that matters. Calm narration matters too. Telling a story carefully does not erase pain. It offers a way to carry it. Time and bacteria work on ships in ways that are steady and, in their own way, beautiful. Corrosion is chemistry that eats iron when oxygen and water meet metal. It starts at scratches and edges and moves across surfaces like frost maps. A window, microbes turn iron into different compounds that flake and fracture. In cold, deep water, this process is slow. In warm, shallow water, especially where currents brush fresh oxygen across steel, it speeds up. Wood faces a different enemy, small organisms that love cellulose. In some seas, shipworms, tiny hungry creatures, turn oak and pine into lace within a few seasons. In others, cold temperatures slow them down so much that hulls from centuries ago keep their shape, even if their iron nails have bloomed with rust. A ship's collapse timeline depends on depth, temperature, current, and material. Some wrecks will be gone within our lifetimes, turned into a scatter of plates and machinery. Others will keep their outline a little longer, enough for future cameras to keep building models that teach and remember. Quick fact: the most precise 3D models of wrecks today can measure changes over years, providing a quiet, respectful way to watch nature do its work without touching a thing. What comes next for the locker? The deep sea is seeing more traffic of a new kind. Cables cross oceans to carry messages that used to fly through air. They lie on the bottom and link continents. Engineers pick routes that avoid steep slopes and logged wrecks. But the map is crowded. Proposals for deep-sea mining add another conversation. The minerals sought lie in fields where strange creatures live, and those places sometimes share regions with historic sites. The key will be careful planning and strict protection, not only for ecology but for memory. Storm patterns are also shifting in some regions as climate changes the ocean's skin. That may alter where ships face the most risk and where rescue is hardest. On the bright side, tools are improving. Sonar gets sharper. ROVs get gentler and cheaper. Photogrammetry workflows get faster. That means more education, more virtual visits, and less need to lay hands on sites that should be left alone. Step by step, the world is learning how to balance curiosity with care. Reframing the myth does not mean discarding it. The phrase "Davy Jones' locker" is a label people use to respect risk, to remind each other that the ocean has rules stronger than pride, and to point at a place beyond ordinary reach. Sailors were really telling each other something practical. Tie the rope, check the bilge, watch the weather, wear the gear, respect the sea. The locker is not a punishment chamber. It is a final address that needs no street name. Questions always arrive. So a few quick answers help. Can divers go to these places? Some, yes, if they are shallow and safe, and if the law and families allow it. Many, no, because depth and respect both say no. Why not raise ships? Because they are graves. Because raising can damage what is left. Because the cost and risk are heavy. And because resting places deserve rest. Do wrecks move? Some shift with storms or slides. Others sink into silt and become part of the bottom. Who owns artifacts? Ownership varies. Warships usually remain the property of their country. Other wrecks may fall under different rules. But ethics guide decisions more than price tags do. Why publish coordinates or keep them secret? Publishing educates but can invite collectors who do not ask. Keeping them quiet protects sites but limits public knowledge. The balanced path many follow is to share images and stories, not GPS points. A few small postcards from the deep paint details that long explanations miss. In one wreck, a watch sits with its hands forever, at a time most likely close to the moment power failed. It probably stopped, not because of drama, but because salt found its way into tiny gears. In another, a china teacup rests in a shallow bowl of silt, lip clean as if waiting for tea that will never pour. Cameras have glided past a helm that remains turned a few degrees off straight, not because a ghost is steering, but because a helmsman once made a choice in weather that froze into metal when waters surged in. A nameplate lies face up where an ROV found it once and never again, because the next season, a blanket of silt covered it like snow covers a stone. A bell that a legal, respectful team brought up for a ceremony rang one clear note on land, then returned to the sea to rest with the ship. None of these are spooky, they are human. To anchor all of this, return to where the story began. A battleship that vanished, a submarine that did not call again, and a nameplate seen at 4,000 meters. Together they show the line from myth to map. The sailor's phrase was not empty. It was a way to stay calm in a hard trade. Now tools and laws and shared memory give the locker edges that can be traced. The ocean keeps what it takes. People can choose what to do with that knowledge. The calm path is clear. Learn the stories, protect the graves, and let the sea keep what it keeps. One last quiet fact remains. Even in the deepest water, a little light travels. Not enough to see with eyes, but enough for those who remember to know that remembrance is not wasted. It reaches. The next turn of the story sits with a small patrol craft that went out on a simple job and did not return. It did not carry headlines or a famous name. It carried a crew who knew each other's birthdays and the right way to coil a rope so it would not knot when thrown. The craft struck heavy weather near a cape where tides meet like wrestlers. Radios worked for a while, then broke into static. Hours later, a fishing boat found a life ring with chipped paint and no one attached. Years afterward, a survey team built a map of the bay and drew a clean oval on the screen. A hull on its side, half buried, the propeller just visible. The families asked one question that repeats across decades. Is that them? The answer was yes. No more, no less. The water did the same job it always does, which is to hold what falls into it. And the map gave the living a place to point when talking became heavy. A different case lives out in open ocean. A transport ship in wartime took a torpedo under a dark sky. The ship listed. Lifeboats became the whole world for those who could reach them. People in the water called each other's names and heard only wind. In the morning, a few boats were found. Night after that, the families found sleep by walking in circles, as if moving in a kitchen could move a ship on a sea. Decades passed. A research team looking for a reef fish used sonar that noticed a long shadow and a clean line where no such line should be. The pattern matched a ship's hull and a broken bow. The depth was beyond diving. An ROV visited. The footage showed a deck with scattered cargo, a staircase that ended in silt, and a flag mount empty of flag. A historian narrated for the families in a room on land and said, "This is their resting place." A spouse touched the screen and said a single word, the name of the person who had been missing for so long. That was enough. The sea did not change. The living did. Let's go step by step into submarines. The tightest rooms that ever sailed. On a trial run in fair weather, a new submarine once dived and did not level off again. The official report that followed was long and careful. Its outcome was practical. Redesigns in valves, retraining on checks, rules about weather, updates to emergency balloons that drag a cable to the surface so a ship above can find the boat below. Every line in the report turned into a habit. Every habit turned into a reflex. A sailor who knots a lanyard on a valve today carries a legacy of lessons learned at high cost. A later submarine took the ocean route home and grew silent near a latitude few passengers ever see. The search covered a wide field, as wide as a whole country. The discovery came many years later, when deep cameras could work miles down without breaking. The images were grainy at first, then sharp. A bow section here, a stern there, debris between. That map answered the technical question and left the human question untouched. A parent said, He loved cinnamon rolls on Sunday. That sentence has more weight than any coordinate. Implosion physics can be explained gently. A submarine hull is a balancing act between outside pressure and inner structure. If a small part fails at great depth, the failure races across the hull in a heartbeat. The air inside turns to shock. The metal cannot flex enough to keep shape. In that moment, time for those aboard does not stretch. It collapses. This is said not to dramatize, but to comfort. Stories often try to fill silence with imagined scenes. The ocean does not leave room for those scenes when a loss happens at depth. The calm truth is kinder. Civilian ships carry different kinds of stories. In a wide estuary, where brown river water meets blue sea, a ferry left a dock and never reached the next. It was a weekday, a workday. Passengers carried briefcases, lunchboxes, and the tired faces of people with jobs that start early. A sudden turn and a poor ballast left the ship vulnerable. A wave from a passing vessel arrived at the wrong angle. The deck tipped near a pier and then tipped more. A handful made it to ladders. Many did not. The investigation changed rules on notice boards and in wheelhouses for years afterward. An ROV visit years later showed benches and windows and the kind of everyday objects that make a viewer exhale. A small backpack floated into frame, settled, and stayed still. A diver who watched the footage later said, "It looked like waiting, but there is no waiting there. There is only resting." That observation captured the tone this subject requires. Another liner from an earlier century hit ice and sank in the kind of cold that blows fire lanterns into icicles. Everyone knows part of that story, so the focus here is not the movie, not the legends, but the physics and the aftermath. Hull plates built for an age when steel was made a little differently met sharp ice at speed. Compartments that were supposed to keep the ship afloat kept it afloat for a time, then allowed water to spread when it reached their tops. Boats were launched with some seats empty because training had not kept up with the idea that people would not believe a giant ship could die. Quick fact, what changed afterward matters most. Lifeboat capacity minimums were raised. Radio watches stayed live all night. Ice patrols looked harder at shipping lanes. The ocean did not change. People did. There are places where wrecks stack like quiet books on a shelf. A channel from open ocean into a busy port sees fog in autumn and storms in spring. 2 world wars left mines here and there, and a post-war boom filled the lanes with cargo. Ships hit sandbars, collided in low visibility, caught fire, or simply wore out where currents pulled at rivets. The bottom now holds a museum that no one should walk through, unless trained and cleared. Fishing lines snag on the edges of history. Davers refer to edgy's eyes as junkyards, but that word can mislead. These are graveyards, yes, but also archives. A ceramic jar sits on a rim. A bicycle lies upside down on a hatch, as if waiting for a child who grew old on land and never learned where the bicycle went. Photogrammetry teams stitch passes together, and in quiet rooms on shore, turn them into models anyone can rotate. A teacher can point to a valve hand wheel and say, "This mattered," and a student with no salt on their boots can understand. Watch out for this detail about mapping. The public sometimes asks why exact coordinates are not shared for every site. The reason is straightforward. Some people, a small number, cut into wrecks for souvenirs or metal. Most mean no harm and enjoy history. A few cause harm. Laws and ethics try to guard the majority of goodwill from the minority that makes trouble. The balance many institutions choose is to publish models, photographs, and distances without a GPS readout. That way, thousands can visit a site virtually while the physical site rests in peace. Consider the quiet power of small artifacts. A spoon on a deck is not a poem. It is a spoon, but it carries the weight of hands that once ate, laughed, and worked. A shoe invites the mind to draw a person. The mind should resist drawing a face. The right approach is to say someone wore this and leave it there. Museums that hold legally recovered items from accessible wrecks often present them with plain labels. Ship name, date, depth, object name. The plain label is the respectful choice. It leaves room for viewers to bring their own family stories to the glass. Law and custom meet in places few people think about: dockyards, insurers' offices, and naval memorial committees. When a government marks a site as a war grave, flags on many kinds of ships respond. Captains tell crews to keep distance. Anchors are dropped elsewhere. Tour boats turn off commentary microphones as they pass and let the engine hum fill the minute. On land, memorial walls add names while craftspersons carve letters with sandblasters and templates that look like stencils. A relative might trace a letter with one finger. That gesture has been repeated more times than anyone can count, on stone and bronze and wood. It does not grow old. On some anniversaries, ships sound horns at a set time. The tone travels across water, which carries sound far. People on shore hear it and stop talking without knowing exactly why they stopped. That shared silence is a kind of law too. There is a chapter about salvage that asks for care. Salvage once meant reward for bringing value back from risk. Today, salvage near graves is a different conversation. Engineers are sometimes called to remove dangerous oil from old tanks that threaten to leak and harm wildlife. They drill gently, using tools that do not vibrate much, and warm the thick oil to coax it out. They move slowly, like visitors who take off hats in a chapel. In rare cases, raising a part of a wreck helps answer safety questions or teaches lessons that protect the living. When that happens, the work is done under permits, with families informed, with ceremonies before and after. The modern default, though, is to leave wrecks whole. The absence of rescue is not neglect. It is a decision to let the grave stay a grave. A quick fact about the chemistry working quietly on steel. Oxygen is a partner that never runs out at shallow depths, which is why exposed steel turns orange and flakes at greater depths. Less oxygen means slower rusting, but not no rusting. Microbes, especially sulfate-reducing bacteria, can do their work without oxygen and produce compounds that chew at iron differently. The result can look like lace on a beam, with edges strangely delicate. On wooden wrecks in cold water, the enemy is a slow eater called a gribble or a shipworm, depending on place and species. In tropical shallows, these eaters work fast. In polar or deep water, they work like old clocks, steady and slow. Some hulls from centuries past still mirror the shape of their launch day, their wood protected by cold and mud. In other places, nothing wooden remains but the outline marked by iron fasteners that refuse to leave. The living ocean does not pause for memory. Fish use wrecks as if they were reefs made by time. Schools circle and scatter, then return. Octopuses decorate doorways with shells of meals. A sea turtle sometimes rests on a smooth plate as if it were a sun-warmed rock. Corals, where the water is right, grow on edges and adjust to metal as easily as they adjust to stone. There is a debate in coastal planning about whether to sink old ships on purpose to make reefs. The programs that do it well clean hulls, strip pollutants, and place the structure in legal sites, then publish research on fish communities that follow. The programs that do it poorly cut corners or ignore local biology. The ocean rewards the careful more than the careless, just as any craft does. Listen to a few voices before moving forward. A chief engineer who once survived a shipboard fire said in an interview, he checked the door with the back of his hand. Cool. He opened. That's how it's supposed to be done. The point was technique, not theater. A widow speaking at a memorial said, he told me the sea would keep him if it had to. I told him to be late for once. The crowd smiled and breathed the kind of breath that comes after a small laugh at a solemn event. A search and rescue pilot, asked what people should know, said, call early, wear your gear, keep a light, Not dramatic, just true. A historian speaking to students pointed out that old sailor slang preserved rules long before checklists were common. "One hand for the ship, one for yourself," she said, then explained that the line taught a crew to hold on with one hand while working with the other. The rhythm is old because the wisdom is solid. Cables are written into this story, thin as pencils and long as continents. They carry messages that used to bounce off satellites. They rest on the bottom, where slopes are safe, away from cliffs that slide and from wreck fields when planners can avoid them. When storms cross shallows, anchors drop, and sometimes snag a cable. Repair ships go out quietly and fix them. Those ships know charts of wrecks the way taxi drivers know city shortcuts. The two maps live side by side. This new traffic in the locker needs to be a good guest. So far, most of it is. The question of deep-sea mining appears in conversations about the future. The resources are minerals gathered in nodules that look like black potatoes on the seafloor. They grow over long spans of time, around small seeds, tiny shells, bits of rock, and hold metals useful for electronics. Some proposed mining areas lie far from known wreck fields, but the ocean is one room even when divided into corners. Critics ask for caution. Proponents ask for rules. Regulators study. The place where memory and industry meet must be chosen with the slow care of a person threading a needle in dim light. The best outcome protects creatures that live where pressure is high and light is none, while guarding the graves that tell human history in hard metal and soft silt. A careful listener might ask, are there ever exceptions to leave it be? Yes, a few. In some wrecks, fuel or munitions threaten coastlines or fisheries. Teams trained to handle such dangers go down and defuse their targets. They work with robots when possible, with divers only when necessary. They use the minimum force needed because the site is not a quarry. They finish, they calibrate the memorial plaque if there is one, and they leave. The locker is not only oceans. Large lakes hold their own chapters. Fresh water treats wood kindly in many regions, leaving hulls crisp below the surface. Cold and depth make time slow. Divers speak of seeing paint on letters laid down by hands that then went home and ate stew long ago. Steamships that once ferried people to summer towns turned into sites that teach young divers buoyancy and respect. Lakes also hold workboats, ferries, and small craft, whose names exist only in local memories and narrow columns of old newspapers. A Great Lakes storm is a match for any ocean gale. Wind races along open water and stacks waves into lines that feel like walls. A captain once wrote, "The lake is as hard as any sea," and that sentence stands. A museum audio guide. Quality suits this. A visitor can imagine walking along a calm corridor lined with glass cases. Inside, there are ship's wheels, china, maps with graceful lines, and bent pieces of steel that suddenly make other pieces make sense. Each case has a small note, where, when, who, what. But the main exhibit is not in a case. It is under waves. The guide invites patience. It invites a slower look at technologies that let the living bear witness without trespassing. It points out that bearing witness is a duty, not a hobby. People are at their best when they remember well. Return to the beginning idea that myth and proof can sit in the same chair without fighting. The phrase Davy Jones' locker gives a handle to a room most people cannot visit, and modern tools add light to that room without breaking it open. Parents explain to children that the sea is powerful and not mean. Children nod and repeat the rules without fully understanding, the way children repeat all rules at first. Later, some of those children grow into sailors, scientists, or storytellers. They take the phrase and keep it. They add what they have learned. Tie the knot. Check the tank. Read the chart. Respect the flag on the plotter that marks a grave. Knowledge, in this subject, is not a set of answers. It is a set of behaviors shaped by memory. There are quiet stories that deserve a few more breaths. In a southern archipelago, a mail ship ran along a route that touched small islands, like stitches. One season, a late storm pulled hard and the ship missed a gap between rocks by less than a ship's length. The bow hit and stayed. The stern broke and turned. Locals in small boats rowed out in rain so heavy the world shrank to 20 meters. They pulled who they could. On the beach afterward, someone wrote the names of those saved in wet sand and counted them twice. Today, an ROV visits once a year and lays a small wreath of biodegradable material on the deck. The camera watches it drift and settle. That gesture is not law. It is kindness. In a far north sound, a trawler capsized when catch lines tangled and the clock of waves did not match the clock of the deck. The crew trained and drilled. The cold water still won. The vessel was later found upright on the bottom. Nets still hung like curtains. A marine biologist studying code passed the wreck often and came to think of it as a landmark. She wrote in a field note, turning at the netted house, then stopped and added a line. Remember who lived here. The note is not a poem. It is a good sentence that keeps two truths in one line. Sometimes a ship's life ends with a deliberate choice that becomes a community event. A navy retires a ship and places it gently on the bottom in a clean, prepared site to build a reef and to create a destination for training. The ceremony on deck before sinking carries photographs, a bell, and sailors who served aboard. Speeches are short. The ship slips under with tugs guiding. Weeks later, a diver hovers in clear water and sees the ship in a new role. Fish carousels around the bow. The diver's slate reads 3 words, a good ending. That too belongs to the story of the locker, because the name does not only mean loss, it means finality accepted with care. Education will carry this subject safely into homes where the nearest saltwater is a bottled drink in a refrigerator. Schools and libraries now show high-resolution 3D walkthroughs built from thousands of photographs. A child with a tablet can glide along a deck and stop to look at a cleat or a bolt, and then tap to hear a voice explain what that piece is for. The voice does not frighten. It teaches. In a living room, an elder who once sailed cargo out of a winter port can add personal notes. That hook is where the line goes when the wind jumps. Family history and public history meet in that moment. Quick fact: every improvement in safety at sea started in a room on land where people talked after loss. Doors that open outward, lights that glow even when power fails, radios with backup batteries, flares that do not mind rain, immersion suits that buy heat and time, rails at the right height, escape hatches marked with shapes that hands can read in the dark. Each change turns the wheel a little in favor of the living. Each change honors the resting. A final handful of postcards helps the eye rest on details that carry big meanings without loud words. A ladder stops one rung short of a deck where wood is gone and silt sits. That missing rung says more about time than a whole paragraph can say. A logbook sealed in a case on a museum wall opens to a page where weather is fine and sea is moderate, with neat pen lines. That ordinary page invites a reader to imagine the calm before days that would not be calm. A crate marked with faded letters that once promised spices or overcoats sits on its side, the lid gone, the contents eaten by time. The crate is a promise kept by a journey that did not finish. A small brass plate engraved with a maker's city and year gleams faintly under the right ROV light. It ties a ship on the bottom to a workshop on a riverbank and to hands that filed and polished and took pride. A child asks in a museum, "Did they find the people?" The guide answers softly, "They found where the people rest." When the camera pulls back, the whole picture fits in the mind with room to breathe. The old phrase stays useful. The new tools stay respectful. The habits of safety stay sharp. The families who remember stay centered. The ocean keeps what it takes. The living keep stories, laws, and care. The balance is not perfect, but it is better than before. If the story began with a curse spoken to steady nerves, it ends with a set of good rules spoken to steady lives. The calm path forward draws on small, practical habits that add up. Crews now practice drills in daylight and in darkness, with real gear and real noise, so reflexes stay honest. Harbor pilots share notes about tricky channels, where sand shifts after winter storms. Coastal radios keep watch lists of vessels, whose captains prefer to call early when a plan changes, reducing small confusions that once grew into big problems. Fishermen swap coordinates of wrecks, not to hoard secret spots, but to help each other avoid snags and respect graves. Researchers publish clear guides, so weekend boaters understand why some buoys mark no-go zones, even when water looks empty. The ocean asks for no ceremony. It rewards steady attention. There are quiet advances worth a closer look. High-frequency sonar, used at slow speeds, paints wrecks with such fine detail that archaeologists can read construction choices made a century ago. Low-light cameras now see more with less, which means shorter visits that disturb less silt and fewer animals. Robotic arms lift only when permits demand it. Most of the time they point and measure. Data moves from ship to shore in real time, letting families and officials decide together how to proceed when a site appears on a screen for the first time. In some projects, families speak first before press, before public, and choose the words that announce a find. That order is gentle and right. Education keeps growing too. Maritime museums invite veterans, deckhands, and ferry operators to tell simple truths in evening talks that sound like living room conversations. Classrooms host video calls with ROV pilots who describe how a typical dive feels like: long, careful, sometimes a little boring, with one or two moments that change how a person understands history. Boring is good, they say with a smile. Boring means safe and respectful. Teachers wrap units around those calls and add reading from ship logs, weather charts, and family letters. Students learn to read the sea as a place and as a story, not as a stage for drama. There is a strand of this subject tied to language. The sea shaped English and many other tongues. Phrases like "learn the ropes," "by and large," and "above board" began where canvas and rope met wind. Even loose cannon came from decks, where heavy guns could break free if not lashed. Davy Jones' locker belongs to that family of words that carry craft. When someone says it now, they may imagine a cartoon figure or a dramatic scene, but beneath the image sits the old utility, a way to refer to what lies beyond return without re-wounding the listener. Language can be a cushion. It can also be a compass, pointing the mind back to respect when modern speed tries to rush past it. The present holds room for new memorial forms that keep hands off the sea. Digital walls of names allow families to add photographs, recipes, jokes, and small memories that would never fit on stone. A son might upload a picture of a father in a deck jacket, grinning with a dented coffee mug. A neighbor might write, "He always helped jump a car battery without making a person feel dumb." These details work like good ballast. They keep the person steady in memory, not only as lost at sea, but as fully themselves. On shorelines, quiet gardens facing water give those who cannot travel a place to sit and breathe. Benches carry plaques with simple lines such as "beloved brother," "steady hand," which say much with little. Science returns for another round, this time to connect the dots between ecology and remembrance. Wrecks in midwater depths often host communities that differ from nearby reefs. Metal holds heat a bit differently, channels currents, and shapes shade. Some species choose those microclimates. Cameras that count fish along transects, straight lines mapped across a site, show patterns that help managers decide when to keep fishermen away, when to allow careful catch and release, and when to let nature be without extra rules. Biologists who speak at memorial boards use clear words. A site can be both a grave and a nursery. Those truths do not cancel each other. They share the same coordinates. Take a slow walk through a few more case studies that underline how varied the locker really is. In a southern hemisphere strait, a wooden bark from the age of sail lies on her starboard side, ribs open to soft sediment. No names survive for most of the crew. Only a short newspaper notice about loss with all hands. Yet the site remains a focal point for local history groups who place a wreath from a small boat each year, rain or shine. In a tropical archipelago, a Second World War wreck sits near coral heads in water clear as glass. Divers visit with strict rules: no penetration, no removal, no touching. They hover back like guests in a quiet home. Guides brief each diver on the human story before anyone enters the water. The dives end with a minute of stillness, bubbles ticking toward light. In a northern fjord, a cargo steamship rests upright, as if tied to a perfect dock. Her deck is a street now, with anemones like street lamps. Visibility runs long and blue. Technical divers sometimes practice hover skills here without crossing any threshold or entering any room. They leave only a string of bubbles and a small promise to return with the same care. The legal frame around such places continues to mature. Courts in several countries have recognized the concept of human remains sites underwater, even when remains are no longer visible. That recognition honors the reality of closed compartments and the way time transforms bones into minerals and then into sediment. It is not the visibility that matters, but the known presence. Maritime authorities coordinate with cultural heritage agencies so that charts and permit systems tell one story, not two. Clear rules help good actors do right and give enforcement tools to stop the few who ignore rules. Insurance companies, often invisible in public narratives, use policy terms to nudge operators towards safer choices and respectful practices. Incentives work quietly and well. Culture keeps reflecting this topic in new ways. Novelists write characters who treat the sea with the same tone found here. Not fear, not bravado, but practical awe. Filmmakers borrow real research footage and pair it with interviews, letting witnesses carry scenes. Documentaries avoid spooky soundtracks and long echo effects. They choose the hum of machine rooms and the simple creak of a ship in swell. If they use sound at all, songs return to shanty rhythms, not to romanticize danger but to celebrate teamwork. A chorus of voices sharing a beat is what kept anchors moving and sails trimmed. That spirit fits this era too. There is also the household level. Families who live far from coasts still teach water respect at lakes and rivers. They practice life jacket habits with children so that the habit becomes a reflex, not an argument. They check weather twice before launching small boats and learn to read the sky. They keep lights and whistles in places that hands find in the dark. These are small gestures that honor big stories. They tie the careful present to a careful reading of the past. Return again to submarines to touch on one more layer: the way crews memorialize their own. Submariners keep rolls of names called eternal patrol lists. Ceremonies read those names with a bell between clusters, pausing after each to let the room breathe. The phrase "on eternal patrol" is precise and kind. It says a mission continues in a way that implies no fear, only steadiness. In museums that host preserved submarines, docents often end tours where sailors once ate together and tell visitors, quiet spaces like this one matter, and then stop speaking for a long few seconds. That silence often teaches more than the tour. Technology from space quietly supports the locker too. Satellites that watch the sea for weather also notice changes in sea surface height and color that hint at current shifts and algal blooms. When storms form, modern track forecasts give ships days of lead time to avoid the worst quadrants. This is not a dry detail. It is a thread that sews fewer names onto walls. Portable beacons that speak to satellites now fit in a pocket. When someone falls overboard, those beacons can point rescuers fast to a spot that would have been a guess a generation ago. Call early, wear your gear, keep a light, the pilot said earlier. Add, carry a beacon. It tips the odds. The story makes room for one more idea: cooperation across borders. Oceans connect nations, whether they get along or not. Joint expeditions to document wrecks that belong to history, not to any single flag, show how science can soften lines on maps. Teams share vessels, pilots, and methods. Reports list all partners. Images carry all logos. Artifacts, if any, are recovered under strict permits. Go where law and fairness say they should. Often that means they stay together, not split, so future visitors can see a whole tale in one case. Cooperation does not erase grief, it shows respect. Questions persist around publishing locations. Some institutions adopt a tiered approach. For shallow sites already popular with divers and protected by laws and community norms, coordinates may be shared because visibility and vigilance deter harm. For deeper graves, especially those with closed compartments and known loss of life, only broad regions are discussed. Scholars can request specifics with credentials and a plan that honors families. This middle path allows learning without inviting casual traffic. It treats the locker as a library with rare books, open to readers, handled with gloves. Another layer involves climate and coasts. Rising seas nibble at shorelines that host memorials and cemeteries related to maritime loss. Communities plan seawalls, living shorelines with marsh plantings, and, when needed, careful relocations of stones and plaques. Moving a memorial can feel like another loss. Done with ceremony and involvement of families, it can also feel like caretaking. The names do not belong to a single spot of dirt. They belong to memory. Memory can travel. There are still more small postcards that say much. A bronze porthole on a museum wall shows thumb polish where visitors have touched the rim for decades. Guards do not scold. The wear is itself a record of care. In a harbor town, an old sailor keeps a key on a hook by his door. It once fit a locker on a ship that no longer exists. He touches it before leaving the house, not out of superstition, but because the cool metal feels like the start of a good watch. On a remote island, a row of wooden crosses faces a reef. The names have faded. Each year, school children repaint the letters under a teacher's guidance. The teacher does not explain much. The work is the explanation. The narrative turns toward a gentle summary. The phrase Davy Jones' locker began as a workman's shorthand, a way to talk about a place beyond reach without breaking the heart. In the saying, over centuries that shorthand gathered myth like a ship gathers barnacles. In modern times, tools of sound and light have peeled back the barnacles and shown rivets, decks, and rooms with enough clarity to end arguments and to start new duties. The duty is simple: learn the stories, keep the sites safe, share what can teach, leave the rest alone. A calm recap helps hold the whole in the mind. The sailor's curse was never magic. It was a respectful nickname for a final address. The deep ocean is not a villain. It is a set of steady forces, pressure, cold, dark, and time, that treat all vessels the same. The camera and the sonar did not kill wonder. They sharpened it and gave families places to point to when words felt thin. Laws and customs evolved toward protection because societies decided that graves deserve quiet, even when they lie under miles of water. Wrecks became reefs that support life, and that does not make them less solemn. Stories grew from logs to literature to films, and the best of those stories now choose honesty over horror. Education moves through homes and schools, bringing careful images and voices that explain rather than thrill. The balance between curiosity and care is not perfect, but it improves with each measured step. What remains is the ending that is also a beginning for any viewer who chooses to carry it. The sea keeps what it takes. The living keep faith. Faith here is not a grand statement. It is a stack of small acts. It is a captain making a cautious call. It is a museum volunteer labeling an object with plain words. It is a diver hovering hands-off and backing away from a doorway that leads into a room where people once breathed. It is a family placing flowers on a pier and telling a story about laughter at a kitchen table, not about last moments. It is a student learning a knot, a radio check, a weather pattern, and the habit of care. There is no need to end with a chill. End with a truth that rests well. Even in the deepest water, far below any sunlight, there is motion and life, slow and patient. Crabs walk across a plate. Eels trace paths between beams. Bacteria build delicate lace from iron. A ship slowly becomes the seafloor it rests on, and the seafloor becomes home to quiet creatures. Above, waves go on with their rise and fall. Near a coast, a child presses a shell to an ear and hears a sound many swear is the sea. Technically, it is the blood in the ear and the world's noise trapped and echoed, but the feeling is right. The sound suggests distance and return. It suggests that nothing is entirely gone while it is remembered with care. So the promise made at the start keeps its shape. This was not a ghost story. It was a calm walk through a real landscape most people will never see with their own eyes. The map is drawn with echoes and light. The names are written in ledgers and in hearts. The rules are simple and strong. Learn the stories. Protect the graves. Let the sea keep what it keeps. A last quiet fact. And then silence. Light dropped into the ocean does not travel far, but it travels some. And in that small distance, it is enough for finding, enough for honoring, and enough for saying, with steady voice, that the locker is known and cared for.